Hi everyone, my name's Michael and I am here from Brutus, Monroe to share with you today some fun and exciting ways to use the stick and stamp mat and the stick and stamp pigment palette. This is great for watercoloring and all kinds of stamping and stenciling and blending. So we're just going to jump right in and talk about a couple things and use our aqua pigments today on our pigment palette for some really fun watercoloring. Okay, so first and foremost, the stick and stamp mat is a newer product that has really changed the way that people are stenciling, stamping. It holds your paper. It's really small and small enough to fit inside a stamping platform. So if you are stamping and you want to hold your cardstock down, it fits perfectly inside and doesn't interrupt any stamping that you might be doing. So that's one way to use it, but you don't have to use it in a stamping platform. You can just use it right on your desk, your table, whatever's in your craft room that you can use. So the stick and stamp mat does have an acetate film on the top to protect the stickiness. So you just want to go ahead and peel that off to start. And you want to save this piece of acetate. It's very important that whenever you're finished using your stick and stamp mat, you simply just slide it back on. It'll stick right to the mat and it'll protect it while you store it somewhere in your craft room. So I do know that several people like to get multiples of the stick and stamp mat. Some people want one specifically for ink blending. Some people want one specifically for stamping. So they're a very reasonable, low price and value. So I would recommend getting a few of them if you really fall in love with it. So the second part that we're going to talk about is the stick and stamp pigment palette. This is a small laminate surface. It's laminated on both sides. It's very thick. And the perfect use for this is to just stick it right on top of your mat. So as you move the mat around and pick it up, it's attached, but it easily comes off. And you can just wipe this clean. And the cool part is you can take liquid watercolors and put them in any of these little dots and use it right on your mat. So for example, we'll take a little bit of this green just to show you. These are our aqua pigments. They are concentrated liquid watercolors. You can just put a little droplet there and it's gonna stay, right where you want it. And there are, different colors through the rainbow, and there's a few black circles too if you wanted to mix and create your own blend of color. If you wanted to, you could also use reinkers for your ink pads. So I know a lot of people have reinkers for their ink pads and they might think like, wow, I don't stamp enough with that color. What am I gonna do with reinker? Well, you can also watercolor with reinkers. Dye-based ink reinkers are great for that. One thing I recommend is if you have an ink line that you really love and you wanna match the colors, that's a great way to do it. So I'm just gonna put a couple colors on here before we start our project today. So this is gonna be blue. And our aqua pigments come in these small little glass bottles with droppers. So you can take out just enough. You don't have to pour a lot out and waste it. They last a really long time. You can dilute them with water. You can mix them with other colors. They come in a wide variety of colors. Everything in the rainbow, anything you want. So many different colors. But the cool thing is we also have white and pearl. So the white is exactly what it sounds like. It's white. It's great for splattering techniques. And the pearl has a pearlescent finish to it. So you want to shake that up a little bit. Anything that has a kind of a pearly finish sometimes can separate. And that goes for any type of product that has a pearl finish. You want to just shake that up. So you can see that's nice and shiny there already, and that adds just like a nice effect. And the cool thing is you can take the pearl and mix it with the green, the blue, any other colors that you want. So I'm going to be using the Slimline pre-cut watercolor paper today. So it's already pre-cut into 3.5 by 8.5 inches, which is the size of a Slimline panel. So I have one right here, and I'm going to just stick this right onto the mat. Just like that. Now this is Slimline and I have the palette at the top. So little bits at the bottom, no worries. We're just gonna flip it over when we're done. And then I have this stencil here. It is a new stencil. It is called Snowfall. It's great for winter, for the holidays, for whatever you want. And I'm just gonna press that on. And the stick and stamp mat is now going, not only is it holding our paper in place, but it's holding our stencil in place too. So as we move this around, if we bump it or anything, nothing's gonna move or shift. So it's really the perfect solution for everything that you're doing. So I have a couple water brushes, and what we're gonna do is take a water brush and we're gonna start just watercoloring through the stencil. So I know a lot of people would typically not look at a stencil this way, but it's a really fun way to stretch your products and use it for something different. So I'm just gonna squeeze a little water out of the brush into this black circle so we have some to work with. And first I'm gonna take a little bit of this blue, and I'm just going to start lightly painting over the snowflakes. And we're gonna go into different areas. You can dip more water into it if you want to really dilute it, and that way you'll kind of have varying color. So some parts might be lighter, some parts might be darker. It's totally up to you. And then what I'm gonna do is take just a tiny bit of this green, and over here in the middle, mix a little bit of the blue and the green together to get a varying color. So we'll have kind of like a greenish blue hue on these snowflakes and snow in the background in general. And the great thing about this, because we're using watercolor paper underneath it, watercolor paper tends to quickly absorb any medium that you're using, so it doesn't spread very much unless you want it to. So if you wanted to spray the watercolor paper first and make it nice and wet, then it would spread a lot easier. But in this case, because we're going through a stencil, we don't want it to spread. And if we get, you'll notice over here, we're kind of at the edge of the paper. So if you get a little color onto the stick and stamp mat, no worries. We're gonna talk about how we clean that up at the end. We have a cleaner specifically designed for this mat in 2 different options currently. But you definitely, you wanna keep your mat clean for sure, but you don't fear getting any ink or anything on it. It's totally okay. It will still have its effect, its intended purpose, and you'll be all good to go. And the great thing about this little palette is you just wipe it clean. So, you know, you don't have to like rush to the sink and wash out, you know, a whole plastic thing. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just literally wipe it right off. And then that gives you more time with your crafts, less time cleaning, right? I don't know about you, but I don't like to spend too much time cleaning. Okay, and then when you think you've kind of got it covered pretty well, I'm then gonna come in with the pearl color and just take a little bit and put a few little spots of that throughout. And what this is going to do is just add like the slightest little pearlescent finish to certain parts of this design. So some of our snowflakes will have a pearly finish. And then a water brush, you can either rinse these out, or I just like to take a wipe and just kind of wipe off the excess. And then after just a few swipes, it's clean and ready for the next color. Okay, so the fun part here is peeling this off. So let me get under the stencil. We'll peel that back. And look at those snowflakes, you guys. Isn't that so fun? Just through this like simple little stencil. So I'm gonna set the stencil aside and we're gonna adjust our paper. So it peels right off of the stick and stamp mat. And we will stick it right here because we do, since it's a slim line, we want to continue on this design a little bit. So I'm just going to, let me turn it this way. Press that back onto the mat. And you can choose to move this however you want. I just kind of want to line it up. I'm lining it up here so it looks like it repeats the design a little bit. But a stencil like this that has kind of larger images is a really great way to do this. And just make sure it's pressed on the mat nice and tight. Then we'll just take a water brush and do the same thing all over again. Squeeze a little water in there. But this time it'll be quick because we're experts now, right? Just pop a little color in there, a little bit of green, a little bit of blue. Mix those right on up. And it's a really quick way to make something, you know, look like it was nice and handmade. I think liquid watercolor and stenciling is a great way to introduce kids to crafting as well. You know, it's not as involved. There's no ink pads flying around, you know. It's liquid watercolor is nice and washable. So if you have children, grandchildren, or maybe you're a teacher, this would be a great technique to share with some young crafters. All right, and then we'll just take a little bit of that pearl like before. Dab that on in a few places. And we'll be good to go. So then we're just gonna peel that up. And I'm just wiping the stencil with a wipe quickly. I do recommend wiping stencils clean shortly after you use them. They will come clean later, but it's a lot easier when you do it while it's saturated. So I did get a little bit of color underneath, no worries. I'll just dab that up with the wipe, and we're adding a sentiment here, so that's gonna be where we'll put that. So let's peel that off of our stick and stamp mat. And now this is the cool part that I was telling you about. This literally wipes clean. Look, it's already clean. Done, good to go. So this side has the examples for you, and then this side you can also use. It's laminated just like the rest. I find this side great if you're using a blending brush. You can tap ink on here so you don't, you know, get too aggressive with the ink on there. So you'll just take that right off. And I was telling you about cleaning the mat. So we have two different options for cleaning. We have the Hydrangea Squeaky Clean Matte Mist, and then we also have the unscented Squeaky Clean Matte Mist. So either one of these are gonna work great for your craft room. But all you do, you take a little spray, a light spray on your mat. And then you can use a microfiber cloth or a dry wipe. You know, I wouldn't recommend using a paper towel because paper towel has a lot of lint. So a microfiber cloth wouldn't, and a dry wipe wouldn't. And then you're just gonna lightly wipe it. Just lightly wipe that away. You don't wanna scrub too hard because just like anything, if you scrub too hard, you will scrub away some of the sticky properties. So you wanna just make sure that you wipe that nice and lightly. And then as you can see, it's perfectly clean all over again. Now, it will dry, and once it's dry, it'll be totally sticky again. And then you can go ahead and replace your acetate sheet. That's all you have to do. So, moving on with our card project today. So, we're going to be creating a slimline card. So this panel is going to adhere to a slimline card base. Let's take a little bit of adhesive. And I know that this is still drying, and that's totally okay. It's gonna stick perfectly onto our slimline card base, which is It creates a 3.5 by 8.5 card. So basically what that is an 8.5 by 7-inch piece of paper that you scored in the center at 3.5 inches along the 7-inch side. And then you have a perfect slimline card base for these panels. And then I went ahead and pre-cut a piece of silver glitter stock and a piece of red cardstock that's going to leave a nice little border there. And we will put our sentiment onto the red cardstock. So what we're going to do is take a stamping platform, and I am going to grab the mat again to hold this piece of cardstock. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you're stamping a sentiment on a nice little pre-cut piece, it is so hard to keep this aligned, but now there won't be a problem, right? So the sentiment we're going to use is from this Snowflake Swirl stamp set. So we're going to take the Happy Holidays, and we're just going to line that up in the center. And then close your stamping platform. And we're going to heat emboss this. So what I'm going to do with the heat embossing is I'm going to be using our Alabaster White embossing powder. It's a fine detail opaque white powder. But before we do that, we're going to make sure that we powder this up. And we have a magic powder bag. This is a refillable bag that you can refill on your own. The refills are sold separately. The refills look like this. They come in a little bag with the refill powder and a little spoon to put it in the bag. So you just take this, rub it on a little bit, and that's it. Just a little bit is all you need. And then you're going to need embossing ink. So we have the Brutus Monroe embossing ink. It's a nice 2x2 square ink pad, so it's easy to hold. We'll just go ahead and ink up the stamp here. When heat embossing, especially sentiments, I tend to stamp it twice just to make sure that you have really full coverage and it's nice and crisp. So with embossing ink, you can tell pretty quickly if it's on there, but I'll still stamp it twice anyways, just to be certain. I like to make sure that it grabs all of the powder that I can. So we'll just press that down. And then perfect. We have a perfectly stamped sentiment onto our little piece. So we can put this to the side. And then the other thing I want to say is to make sure that you clean your stamps each time that you use them, especially with embossing ink. That is kind of almost like an oil-based product. So you want to make sure it's nice and clean. And our stamp cleaner, which is different from the matte mist cleaner, is called Squeaky Clean as well. This one has a lovely lavender scent. And you just take a little bit, spray it on, take a wipe, and clean it right off. And then that way, if you keep that handy on your table, you'll eventually get into the habit of cleaning your stamps every time. And like I said, I think it's really important to make sure that you clean your stamps as you use them. That way, you can reduce staining, and it's nice to take care of things. Then you don't have to clean it up later. That two seconds it takes is perfect. So I'm just going to, on the back of this, pour the Alabaster White embossing powder right over the top. Make sure. I just like to tap it off. So we'll just grab a heat tool and heat this up. And I just go over it until you see it start to change. Be careful not to burn yourself. And it usually happens pretty quickly like that. And once it's fully transformed, it's finished. You don't want to over emboss anything, because if you do that, it can start to look flat and have like a more matte finish if it's overheated. So make sure that you don't burn your embossing powder. And we'll just let that cool off for a moment, and then we can brush off any of the excess powder that might remain. It'll come right off. You can use a cloth if you want. Just using your fingers works just fine, or a paper towel would be a good thing to do with that. And then I had a little frame that I cut out of glitter stock, so we'll just attach those together. Nice little happy holidays. And like I said, this little spot that kind of got a little wacky, we're just going to cover that right up with the sentiment, and it'll be good to go. So that's another thing. I think it's important for people to see that if you do make like a little bit of a boo-boo or a mistake on a project, just put the sentiment there and no one will ever know but you, right? So that is what the card looks like as of right now. But if we peel this back, I'm going to show you a little bit of a different technique that we can add to this card. So I'm going to just put a little paste paper here to show you. We can take the chroma mists that we carry and add a little bit more to this. So I'm just going to shake it up. This is the Cobalt Blue. And before we spray it on the project, I'm going to show you what it does. So it just adds like a little bit of a spritz of color like that. And it will dry a little bit lighter than it initially looks. So I want to hold this at a little bit of a distance. I don't want to be that close with it. So I'm going to hold it, I don't know, about 10 to 12 inches away from this and just lightly spritz this. And then I'm going to take the Pearl Shimmer Mist, and this one has a shimmer to it. So we're going to shake that one up a bit. Do a little test to make sure it's working. Same thing, a little bit of a distance. Set that aside. And to speed up the process, I will just take a heat tool to dry this. I think that's good enough. Take our splatter spot away, and then we can bring back our sentiment to show you that now, make sure everything's adhered. You have this like really cool splattered effect on that card. So that's another thing. If you did get like a little wonky with the watercolor, you can just spray something over it and it gives it a totally different look, but it still looks just as fun and handmade. So that is a great way to use the stick and stamp mat, the pigment palette, the aqua pigments, all of those fun things. So while we have the stick and stamp mat out, it should be nice and dry now. I'm going to show you a different medium to use with that same stencil. So this is just a card base, an A2 size card base that I got. And I will put just a tiny bit of adhesive inside to hold it together. And then I'm going to take that very same stencil but this time we're going to use our glitter glaze. So glitter glaze is a product that is very sparkly, very shiny. This color is called Hyacinth. I think it's really great for snowflakes. And when you open it up, there's a tiny little protector there. You can see it's like a nice gel-based medium. It smells really good. It's non-toxic. It's made in the USA. It has some really great colorful properties. And the cool thing is, When you see it in the jar, this is what it's going to look like when it's dry. So that was really important to us, to be able to show people what it looks like as it's dry. So I'll just take a little bit on the bottom of the palette knife and spread it through the stencil, right over the stick and stamp mat. And because we're using the stick and stamp mat, the stencil isn't going to move. It's going to stay in place. I know some people use adhesive sprays, which that works too, but then your stencil has adhesive all over it. So I guess it's really a personal preference what you like better. I like the matte because it's so easy to switch it out. And it holds it on nicely. And I know right now you're like, wow, that looks really crazy. You have glitter everywhere. But this product adds just such a pizzazz to anything. When we peel this off, and you don't have to be super precise about it. It's just a glitter medium. So we'll pull that, and then once we peel away, we have all of those beautiful snowflakes directly on the card base. So this does take some time to dry, so you're going to set that aside, a few hours, maybe overnight if you want. I would suggest maybe if you want to mass produce these, doing a whole bunch and leaving them in your craft room. But then same thing, there's a little bit of the glaze on the mat. So just as before, you'll just take the matte mist, a couple little spritzes, and your dry wipe, and just lightly wipe it away. And I always like to take the little sealing disc and put it back onto the glitter glaze before you put it away. You want to make sure you put the lid on nice and tight. This won't dry out quickly. It won't, kind of turn into a rock or anything, but you do want to make sure that you keep it nice and sealed so that that doesn't happen, or so it doesn't contaminate with anything else. And then I just wipe it right off of the palette knife, and you're kind of good to go to move on to something else. But here are just two different things that you can use all of the same products with and get completely different results. So thanks for joining me today.